At my 45th birthday party, my wife announced, "We're opening up our marriage. He's unable to satisfy me in bed and financially." My wife's friends cheered. I smiled. "And who is your new partner?" my wife proudly said. "My ex-boyfriend. I have missed his touch." I laughed. "Here is you and your ex-lover's medical report." The room went silent. You know that feeling when you're standing on the edge of a cliff, but you don't realize you're about to fall? Yeah, that was me, adjusting my navy blazer for the third time while standing outside Meridian's, the kind of upscale joint where they charge you $28 for a salad and act like they're doing you a favor. Blair had picked this place, naturally. My wife had a thing for pretentious spots with names that sounded like luxury car models and waiters who introduced themselves like they were auditioning for Shakespeare in the park. "Just breathe, man," I muttered to myself, checking my reflection in the tinted windows. The blazer looked good. Hell, it better have, considering what Blair dropped on it last Christmas. She'd called it an investment piece, which is wife speak for ridiculously expensive, but makes you look like you could actually afford to eat at places like this. The thing is, she wasn't wrong. The deep navy fabric did make me look more substantial, I guess. More like a guy who had his act together instead of someone whose marriage had been circling the drain for the better part of 2 years. The hostess, all fake eyelashes and practiced smiles, led me through the main dining room toward the private lounge Blair had reserved. Of course she'd gone with the private room. Blair Mackenzie, soon-to-be ex-Blair Mackenzie, though I didn't know that yet, never did anything halfway. If she was throwing me a 45th birthday party, it was going to be Pinterest perfect, or she wasn't doing it at all. I could already hear the carefully curated playlist drifting through the mahogany doors. Our songs, as she liked to call them. You know, the soundtrack to our relationship's greatest hits, back when we actually had those. The room was exactly what I'd expected, dimmed lighting that was supposed to be intimate, but mostly just made everything look expensive and slightly mysterious. Velvet napkins that probably cost more than most people's dinner, and enough fresh flowers to stock a funeral home. Blair was already there, naturally, holding court near the bar in that emerald green dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. She looked stunning, which was both her superpower and her curse. At 42, she could still turn heads at the grocery store, and she knew it. Hell, we all knew it. "There's the birthday boy," she called out, rushing over with arms extended like we were starring in some romantic comedy instead of living through whatever psychological thriller our marriage had become. Her hug lingered a beat too long, and I caught a whiff of her perfume. The expensive stuff she saved for special occasions. Warning sign number 1, though I was too busy playing the part of grateful husband to notice. The guest list was pure Blair. Her sister Monica with her husband Derek, her book club friends Sarah and Jennifer, my buddy Jonah from college, and a handful of her work colleagues from the PR firm. Notably absent were most of my friends, but that had become standard operating procedure lately. Blair had this talent for making my buddies feel unwelcome without ever saying anything directly. Just little comments here and there, subtle eye rolls when they'd tell their stories, the kind of death by 1,000 cuts social assassination that women have perfected since the dawn of time. "Honey, I'm so glad you wore the blazer," Blair whispered in my ear, her hand resting possessively on my chest. "You look powerful tonight. Confident." She smiled that smile. The one that used to make my knees weak, but it started feeling more like a business transaction lately. "I have such a special evening planned for you." The cocktail hour was typical Blair production value. Top shelf everything. Appetizers that looked like tiny sculptures, and conversation that stayed safely in the shallow end of the pool. Monica regaled us with stories about her latest kitchen renovation, while Derek nodded along like he gave a damn about subway tiles versus natural stone backsplashes. The PR crew talked shop about their latest client, some influencer who was disrupting the wellness space with overpriced supplements and yoga pants. I nursed my whiskey and tried to look interested, but my mind kept wandering to the stack of bills on my desk at home and the conversation Blair and I needed to have about our credit card debt. That should have been warning sign number 2. Blair acting like money grew on trees when we'd been fighting about finances for months. But there I was, playing along, accepting congratulations on making it to 45 like it was some kind of achievement instead of just basic survival. "Dinner is served," announced the server, and we filed into the adjoining dining room where Blair had outdone herself again. The table was set like something out of a magazine shoot, complete with enough silverware to perform minor surgery and wine glasses that probably cost more than my car payment. She'd even remembered to request the double chocolate cake from their pastry chef, my favorite, though I couldn't remember the last time she'd paid attention to what I actually liked versus what looked good on her Instagram stories. The conversation flowed like expensive wine, which made sense since that's exactly what we were drinking. Blair was in her element, orchestrating the evening like a conductor leading a symphony. She made sure everyone's glass stayed full, guided the conversation toward topics that made her shine, and touched my arm at all the right moments to remind everyone that this was our special night. It was a masterclass in social performance, and I had to admit, even with everything that was wrong between us, she was damn good at it. But something felt off. Not wrong. Exactly. More like that feeling you get when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking just a beat too quickly. There was an energy in the air, an undercurrent of anticipation that had nothing to do with birthday cake and everything to do with something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Blair kept checking her phone, and there were these weird little glances between her and some of the other guests, like they were all in on some joke I hadn't heard yet. "Everything okay?" I asked during a lull in the conversation, but Blair just smiled and squeezed my hand. "Perfect," she said, and that smile got just a little bit sharper. "Just wait until dessert, honey. I have the most amazing surprise for you." Looking back now, I should have run right then and there. But hindsight's 2020, and I was still playing the role of devoted husband in Blair's carefully choreographed production. So I smiled back, finished my wine, and waited for the other shoe to drop. I just had no idea how hard it was going to hit. You ever have one of those moments where time seems to slow down, like you're watching a car accident happen in slow motion? That's exactly what it felt like when Blair stood up and reached for her wine glass. The dessert plates were being cleared away by servers who moved like ghosts in expensive uniforms, and I was sitting there feeling pleasantly buzzed from the wine, thinking maybe this whole evening was Blair's way of hitting the reset button on whatever the hell our marriage had become. Stupid me. She tapped her butter knife against her glass. Ting, 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 like she was calling a board meeting to order. The sound cut through the ambient chatter and clinking silverware, and suddenly all eyes were on her. Blair McKenzie in her element, commanding attention like it was oxygen, and she was the only one who knew how to breathe it properly. She had this look on her face, this expression I'd seen 1,000 times before when she was about to drop some news that she thought was revolutionary, but usually just made my life more complicated. Everyone, she called out, her voice carrying that fake sweet tone she used when she was about to ask for something she knew I wouldn't want to give. "Before we bring out the birthday cake, I have a very special announcement to make." The way she said "very special" made my skin crawl, like she was announcing a promotion or a pregnancy instead of whatever fresh hell was about to rain down on my 45th birthday. I reached over and took her free hand, thinking maybe she was going to surprise me with news about that trip to Italy we'd been talking about for 3 years, but never had the money for. Or maybe she'd finally decided to quit that soul-sucking PR job and pursue the photography career she'd abandoned when we got married. Hell, at that point I would have been thrilled if she'd announced she was taking up competitive knitting, as long as it meant we were moving forward together instead of just existing in the same house, like roommates who occasionally argued about whose turn it was to take out the trash. Blair squeezed my hand back, but there was something weird about it. Too tight, too possessive, like she was holding on to me for support rather than affection. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into my palm just slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something in her eyes that I couldn't quite read. Excitement, maybe? Or was it anxiety? With Blair, those two emotions often looked identical from the outside. "As many of you know," she began, her voice carrying across the room like she was addressing the United Nations instead of 12 people in a private dining room. "Marriage is a journey. It's about growth, about evolving, about being brave enough to embrace change when the universe presents you with new opportunities." Oh great, I thought. She'd been reading those self-help books again, the ones written by life coaches who charged $300 an hour to tell people that their problems were actually growth opportunities, and that emotional pain was just the universe's way of expanding your consciousness. The room had gone completely quiet now. Even the servers had stopped moving. Monica was leaning forward with her phone already out, because God forbid any family moment go unrecorded for social media posterity. Sarah and Jennifer from the book club were exchanging glances like they were watching a particularly juicy episode of reality television. Jonah looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and avoiding eye contact with everyone. Smart man. After a lot of soul-searching and honest conversations, Blair continued, and I felt a cold dread starting to build in my stomach because honest conversations? We hadn't had an honest conversation in months. Most of our recent interactions consisted of her complaining about money, me apologizing for not making enough of it, and both of us pretending everything was fine when other people were around. We've decided to open up our marriage, she announced, her voice bright and cheerful like she was telling everyone we decided to get a puppy. The words hung in the air for a moment, and I felt my brain trying to process what I'd just heard. Open up our marriage? What the hell did that even mean? I looked around the table, trying to gauge everyone else's reactions. A few of her work friends were actually smiling and nodding like this was perfectly normal dinner conversation. Others looked as confused as I felt. But Blair wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting warmed up. You see, she continued, her grip on my hand tightening even more. He hasn't been able to satisfy me, in bed or financially. She gestured toward me with her wine glass like I was Exhibit A in some kind of marital failure museum. And I think it's time we were all honest about that. The room erupted in a mixture of nervous laughter and shocked silence. A few of her friends actually started clapping, like she'd just announced she was running for president instead of publicly humiliating her husband at his own birthday party. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, a combination of embarrassment and rage that made my vision blur around the edges. This was it. This was rock bottom. Having your wife announce to a room full of people that you're a disappointment in bed and a financial failure? On your birthday? At a party she'd planned and paid for with money we didn't have? I slowly let go of her hand, my own fingers trembling slightly with the effort it took not to stand up and walk out right then and there. But something kept me in my seat. Maybe shock, maybe disbelief, maybe just the trained response of 20 years of marriage to someone who specialized in making scenes in public places. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out the murmur of conversations that had started up around the table. And who? I managed to ask, my voice surprisingly steady considering I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. Is your new partner in this open marriage arrangement? Because if we were doing this, if we were really having this conversation in front of God and everybody, then I wanted all the cards on the table. Blair's smile got wider, and for a moment she looked almost predatory. She flipped her hair over her shoulder in that gesture I used to find sexy, but now just made me nauseous, and said with obvious pride, Nico, my ex-boyfriend from college. I've missed his touch for years. And that's when I knew I was going to destroy her. Nico. Of course it was fucking Nico. Because apparently the universe has a twisted sense of humor and decided that my 45th birthday party needed a special guest appearance from the ghost of my wife's sexual past. I should have seen this coming from a mile away. But hindsight's always 20/20 when you're busy playing the role of trusting husband while your marriage burns down around you like a meth lab explosion. I felt my jaw clench so tight I thought my molars might crack, but I kept my voice level. Years of dealing with Blair's dramatic tendencies had taught me that the calmest person in the room usually wins, and right now I needed to win more than I'd ever needed anything in my life. Nico, I repeated, letting his name hang in the air like a bad smell. Your ex-boyfriend. The same Nico who used to deal weed out of his dorm room and thought Axe body spray was a suitable replacement for actual hygiene. Blair had the audacity to look offended, like I was being unreasonable for bringing up her boyfriend's questionable personal grooming habits from 2 decades ago. That was college, she said, her voice getting that defensive edge it always got when someone pointed out the obvious flaws in her logic. People change. Evolve. He's very successful now. I looked around the room, taking in the faces of our guests. Monica was still recording everything on her phone because apparently my public humiliation was prime content for her Instagram stories. The book club ladies were whispering to each other behind their hands like we were performing dinner theater for their entertainment. Derek looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear, which honestly made 2 of us. But it was Jonah's face that really got to me. He looked genuinely pissed off on my behalf, which reminded me that I still had at least one person in this room who gave a damn about my dignity. Successful at what exactly? I asked, genuinely curious. Because the Nico I remembered from college was the kind of guy who thought entrepreneur was a fancy word for unemployed, and that wearing flip-flops to job interviews showed his authentic self. Before Blair could answer, I spotted him. There he was, leaning against the bar in the corner like he owned the place, holding a glass of what looked like top-shelf scotch, and wearing a smirk that made me want to rearrange his face with a chair. Nico Castellanos, looking exactly like what would happen if someone took the worst aspects of a used car salesman and a wannabe Instagram influencer and mashed them together into one supremely punchable human being. He'd filled out since college, not in a good way, more like what happens when you hit 40 and your metabolism finally gives up the ghost. His hairline had retreated faster than the French army, but he was trying to compensate with one of those carefully sculpted beards that screamed midlife crisis, louder than a red Corvette. He was wearing what looked like an expensive suit, probably designer, the kind of outfit that was supposed to say, "I've made it," but actually just screamed, "I'm trying way too hard to prove I'm not the same loser I was in college." But it was the cologne that really sealed the deal. Even from across the room, I could smell it, the same cheap, overwhelming scent he'd bathed in 25 years ago. Some things never change, apparently. It was like he'd bought stock in whatever company made that chemical assault on the olfactory system and decided to be his own best customer for life. "Nico," Blair called out, waving him over like she was summoning a well-trained dog. "Come meet everyone properly." Because apparently having your wife's side piece lurking in the corner of your birthday party wasn't awkward enough. Now we needed formal introductions. He sauntered over with the kind of confidence that only comes from being completely oblivious to how much everyone in the room despises you. "Hey there, champ," he said to me, extending his hand like we were old buddies meeting up for a beer instead of whatever the hell this situation was supposed to be. His handshake was exactly what I'd expected, too firm, held too long, the kind of power play bullshit that insecure men pull when they're trying to establish dominance. "Nico," I said, not letting go of his hand. "Still using the same cologne from college, I see. Brings back memories. Like that time you got kicked out of the dorms for hotboxing the fire exit stairwell." His smile faltered just slightly, but he recovered quickly. "That's ancient history, man. Water under the bridge. I'm in real estate now. Commercial properties. Very lucrative." Of course he was in real estate. Every douchebag who couldn't hack it in a real career eventually ended up selling property and calling themselves an entrepreneur. "How wonderful," I said, finally releasing his hand. "And how long have you and my wife been reconnecting?" Blair jumped in before he could answer, her cheeks flushing slightly. "We ran into each other at that coffee shop on 5th Street about 6 months ago. It was just such a coincidence, and we started talking, and one thing led to another." 6 months. 6 fucking months they'd been carrying on behind my back, while I was working my ass off trying to keep our finances from completely imploding. 6 months of late nights at the office, mysterious phone calls she had to take in the other room, and sudden interest in new lingerie that I never got to see her wear. I reached into my jacket pocket, feeling the envelope I'd been carrying around for 2 weeks like a loaded gun. The envelope that was about to turn this whole dog and pony show on its head. Because while Blair had been busy planning her grand announcement and coordinating with her new boy toy, I'd been doing a little investigating of my own. "Well," I said, pulling out the envelope with a smile that probably looked more predatory than friendly, "since we're all sharing tonight, I have a little surprise of my own." I held up the manila envelope, watching as Blair's eyes locked onto it with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for car accidents and natural disasters. "What's that?" she asked, but her voice had lost some of its confident edge. "Your birthday gift?" I said, walking toward the center of the room where everyone could see. "From both of you, actually. There's something deeply satisfying about watching someone's entire world crumble in real time, especially when that someone just spent the last 10 minutes publicly humiliating you at your own birthday party." I stood there in the center of the room, holding that manila envelope like it was Excalibur and I was about to pull it from the stone, watching Blair's face as she tried to figure out what kind of surprise her loving husband could possibly have for her on this magical evening of marital revelation. The room had gone dead silent again, but this time it felt different. Before, It was the kind of silence that comes with shock and secondhand embarrassment. Now it felt electric, like everyone could sense that something big was about to happen, but nobody knew whether to run for cover or grab popcorn. Monica had her phone aimed at us like she was documenting a nature special, probably already calculating how many likes this footage was going to get her. I smiled. Not the fake, practice smile I'd been wearing all evening, but something genuine and possibly a little unhinged. The kind of smile that comes from finally having the upper hand after months of being treated like a supporting character in my own life. Since we're all being so wonderfully honest tonight, I said, my voice carrying across the room clear as a bell, I thought it was only fair that I contribute to the conversation. Blair was staring at the envelope like it might contain a live snake, which honestly wasn't that far off. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't quite hide the way all the color had drained from her face, and I noticed her hands were starting to tremble slightly. Good. Let her feel a fraction of the anxiety I'd been living with for months, wondering why my wife had suddenly become so secretive, so distant, so fucking cruel. Honey, she said, and her voice had that carefully controlled tone she used when she was trying to manage a situation that was spinning out of her control. What is that? This, I said, walking slowly toward her like I was savoring every step, is your birthday gift to me. From both of you, actually. I glanced over at Nico, who had somehow managed to look even more uncomfortable than Derek, which was saying something. The smug confidence from 5 minutes ago had evaporated faster than cheap cologne in a windstorm. I handed the envelope to Blair with all the ceremony of a funeral director passing over cremation papers. She took it with shaking hands, her eyes never leaving my face, probably trying to read some hint of what was coming. But I'd had 2 weeks to practice my poker face, 2 weeks to imagine this exact moment, and I wasn't about to give her any previews of the main event. She opened the envelope with the kind of careful precision you usually see in bomb disposal movies, like she was afraid it might explode in her face. Which, in a way, it was about to. She pulled out the papers, official letterhead, clinical language, the kind of documentation that doesn't lie or embellish or try to spare anyone's feelings. Just cold, hard facts in black and white. I watched her read the first few lines, watched her perfect composure start to crack like ice in spring. Her mouth felt open slightly, and she made this little gasping sound that might have been funny under different circumstances. But this wasn't funny. This was justice. What is this? Nico demanded, stepping closer and trying to read over her shoulder. But Blair jerked the papers away from him, clutching them to her chest like they were state secrets. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 20 years of marriage, she was still trying to keep secrets, even when the cat was already out of the bag and doing backflips on the dinner table. I turned to address the room, because if we were doing this, we were going to do it right. All cards on the table. No more lies. No more pretending everything was fine when it was actually a flaming pile of garbage. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, channeling my inner game show host. What you're looking at is a medical report from the Riverside Health Clinic, dated 2 weeks ago. The silence in the room was so thick you could have carved it up and served it with the leftover cake. I could practically hear everyone's brain cells working overtime, trying to process what kind of medical report could possibly be relevant to this clusterfuck of a dinner party. It's a comprehensive STD panel. I continued, my voice steady as a rock, for both Blair McKenzie and Nico Castellanos. Both of whom, according to these completely legitimate and legal documents, tested positive for chlamydia. The word chlamydia hit the room like a grenade going off in a library. Monica's phone actually slipped out of her hands. I heard it hit the floor with a satisfying crack. Sarah from the book club made a choking sound like she was trying not to throw up her $30 salmon. Jennifer just stared at me with her mouth hanging open like she was trying to catch flies. But the best reaction, hands down, was from Derek. Poor bastard looked like he'd been struck by lightning, probably doing rapid mental calculations about whether he needed to get tested too, since his wife had been hanging around with these walking petri dishes for the past 6 months. That's impossible, Blair whispered, but her voice cracked on the word impossible, and we all knew she was lying. She was staring at the papers like they might suddenly change into something less damning, like a birthday card or a restaurant receipt. Oh, it's very possible, I said, my voice getting stronger with every word. In fact, it's documented medical fact. See, the funny thing about STDs is that they don't lie. They don't make excuses. They don't gaslight you or try to make you feel crazy for asking questions. They just are. Nico had gone completely pale, which was quite an achievement considering his year-round spray tan. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then apparently thought better of it and closed it again. Smart move. Anything he said at this point was only going to make things worse. You two have been so careful about keeping your little affairs secret. I continued, really warming up now, but apparently not so careful about protection. Which, honestly, kind of tracks with everything I remember about both of you. Blair was crying now, tears streaming down her face and ruining her perfectly applied makeup. But I wasn't done. Not even close. You know what the beautiful thing about truth is? It doesn't need makeup or fancy lighting or a carefully curated Instagram filter to look good. Truth just stands there, naked and unashamed, daring anyone to argue with it. And right now, I was holding about 3 pages worth of medical-grade truth that was making my wife's mascara run faster than a NASCAR driver on Red Bull. But I wasn't done. Hell no, I was just getting warmed up. Blair might have thought she was the star of this little dinner theater production, but she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'd been married to her for 20 years. I knew all her moves, all her tricks, all the little ways she tried to manipulate situations to her advantage. And tonight, I was going to use every single thing I'd learned against her. I turned to face our captive audience, who were all sitting there like they'd stumbled into the world's most uncomfortable reality TV show. Now, I know what you're all thinking, I said, channeling the confidence of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. How did I get these medical records? Isn't that, private information? I paused for dramatic effect, watching as a few people actually nodded. Well, funny story about that. Blair wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her perfectly applied eyeliner across her cheek like war paint. Stop, she whispered, but her voice had no power left in it. She sounded like a deflated balloon, all the hot air finally escaping. See, about 3 months ago, I continued, ignoring her completely. Blair came home all excited about this new wellness clinic that offered comprehensive health screenings for couples. She said it was part of her new commitment to holistic health and transparency in our relationship. I made air quotes with my fingers, and I swear I heard someone in the audience actually snort with laughter. She insisted we both get tested for everything: blood work, cholesterol, the works, including, of course, sexually transmitted infections. The pieces were starting to fall into place for our audience. I could see the understanding dawning on faces around the room, like sunrise breaking over a particularly ugly landscape. Monica had stopped recording and was just staring at her sister with a mixture of horror and fascination. Now, being the trusting husband that I am, I said, really laying the sarcasm on thick now. I signed all the paperwork she put in front of me, including, and this is the important part, a medical information sharing agreement that allowed either spouse to access the other's test results. For transparency and mutual health accountability. More air quotes, because at this point, why the hell not? Nico had started backing toward the bar like he was planning to make a run for it, but there was nowhere to go. The room only had one exit, and he'd have to get past me to reach it. Plus, I wasn't done with him yet. Not by a long shot. So imagine my surprise. I continued, my voice getting louder and more confident with every word, when I got a call from the clinic 2 weeks ago saying that Blair had come in for additional testing. With a companion. A male companion who, according to their records, was not her husband. I looked directly at Nico, who had gone so pale I was genuinely worried he might pass out and ruin the carpet. Care to guess who that companion was? This is insane, Blair finally managed to say, her voice shaky and desperate. You can't just, this is private, you had no right. Actually, I interrupted, pulling out my phone and waving it like a magic wand. I had every right. Because, and this is the really beautiful part, when you signed that medical information sharing agreement 3 months ago, you gave me legal access to any and all test results conducted under your name at that facility, including the ones from 2 weeks ago, including the ones that show both you and your boy toy here testing positive for an STD that I, your faithful husband of 20 years, somehow managed to avoid contracting. The math was simple enough that even the book club ladies could follow it. If Blair had chlamydia, and Nico had chlamydia, but I didn't have chlamydia, then basic logic dictated that they'd been swapping more than conversation at that coffee shop on Fifth Street. 6 months, I said, turning back to the group. That's how long this has been going on. 6 months of working late and girls' nights out and mysterious phone calls she had to take in the other room. 6 months of me wondering why my wife suddenly seemed like a stranger, why she was so angry all the time, why nothing I did was ever good enough anymore. Jonah was shaking his head, looking like he wanted to punch something. Derek had his head in his hands, probably calculating whether he needed to have an awkward conversation with his own wife about getting tested. The servers had completely disappeared, probably hiding in the kitchen until this nightmare was over. And the really beautiful irony, I said, my voice reaching a crescendo now, is that while you two were busy playing house and apparently forgetting how condoms work, I was busting my ass trying to save our marriage. Going to therapy, reading self-help books, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, why my wife suddenly hated me so much. Blair was full-on sobbing now, but I felt about as much sympathy for her as I would for a rattlesnake with a headache. She'd made her choices. She'd decided to blow up our marriage in the most public, humiliating way possible. And now she was dealing with the consequences. So if we're going to open up our marriage, I said, using her own words against her like a verbal boomerang, then let's make sure everyone has all the facts. Starting with a round of antibiotics for the happy couple, and maybe some basic education about safe sex practices. Because apparently, some people need a refresher course. Nico finally found his voice, but it came out as more of a croak. This is what, Nico? I asked, turning to face him directly. Embarrassing? Awkward? A complete clusterfuck of epic proportions? I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Yeah, welcome to my world. There's a moment in every nuclear explosion, that split second after detonation, but before the mushroom cloud forms, where everything is just silence and light. That's exactly where we were right now. The bomb had gone off, the fallout was spreading, and everyone in the room was trying to process what the hell had just happened. Blair was crying so hard, she looked like a raccoon having an emotional breakdown. Nico was standing there like a deer in headlights if deer could look simultaneously guilty and constipated. And me? I felt strangely calm, like I'd been holding my breath underwater for 6 months and finally broke the surface. Blair opened her mouth, probably to start damage control or launch into one of her famous justification speeches where somehow everything bad that happened was actually someone else's fault. But I wasn't interested in hearing it. I'd listened to enough of her bullshit to last several lifetimes, and tonight was about truth, not whatever alternative reality she was about to try to spin. I held up my hand, not aggressive, not angry, just firm. The kind of gesture that says stop in every language known to humanity. Save it, I said, my voice cutting through her sobs like a hot knife through butter. You've had your say. This was your stage, your big moment, your grand announcement. And now it's mine. The power shift in the room was almost palpable. 20 minutes ago, Blair had been the director of this little production, orchestrating every moment, controlling every conversation. Now she was just another actor in a play where someone else was calling the shots. It was fascinating to watch, in the same way that watching a controlled demolition is fascinating, terrible and destructive, but weirdly satisfying when the building that's coming down needed to go anyway. I looked around the room, taking in each face one by one. Monica, still clutching her cracked phone, looking like she'd rather be literally anywhere else on earth. The book club ladies, probably already composing the group text they were going to send the moment they got in their cars. Derek, poor bastard, looking like he was questioning every life choice that had led him to this moment. The PR crew, treating this whole thing like research for their next crisis management case study. Thank you all for coming tonight, I said, my voice steady and polite, like I was wrapping up a normal dinner party instead of the spectacular implosion of a 20-year marriage. I know this wasn't exactly the entertainment you were expecting when you RSVP'd, but life's full of surprises, isn't it? A few people actually nodded, probably on autopilot, because what the hell do you say to something like that? There's no greeting card for, sorry you had to witness my wife's public humiliation of me followed by my equally public destruction of her credibility. Hallmark really needs to expand their product line. You can take the cake home, I continued, gesturing toward the ridiculously expensive double chocolate monstrosity that was still sitting there, untouched, like a sweet metaphor for our marriage. Beautiful on the outside, but nobody really wanted to dig into it. I've lost my appetite. And that was it. No dramatic storming out, no shouting match, no thrown dishes or overturned tables. Just a simple statement of fact delivered with the kind of calm that comes from finally being done with a situation that's been eating you alive for months. I turned toward the exit, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who knows exactly where they're going and doesn't need to rush to get there. Wait, Blair called out behind me, her voice cracking like a teenager whose voice was changing. We need to talk about this. We need to work this out. We can get counseling. We can. I paused at the doorway but didn't turn around. No, I said, the single word carrying more finality than a judge's gavel. We really don't. Because what was there to work out exactly? She'd been cheating on me for 6 months, had contracted an STD in the process, and had chosen to announce our marital problems to a room full of people at my birthday party. That wasn't a relationship issue. That was a character issue, and you can't counsel someone into being a decent human being. I walked out of that restaurant like I was walking out of my old life, which in a way, I was. The valet brought my car around. Not the fancy BMW Blair had wanted me to lease, but my practical Honda that was paid off and reliable and didn't require me to eat ramen for lunch to afford the payments. As I pulled away from the curb, I could see people streaming out of the restaurant, probably calling Ubers and planning their escape routes from what would undoubtedly go down as the most uncomfortable dinner party in recent memory. My phone was already buzzing with texts, but I ignored them. There would be plenty of time later to deal with the aftermath, to answer questions, to explain myself to people who thought they deserved an explanation. Right now, I just wanted to drive. Jonah was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his car with his arms crossed, looking like a bouncer who'd just watched someone get thrown out of the club. He'd texted me earlier in the week, asking if I needed backup for tonight. At the time, I'd thought he was being paranoid. Now I realized he'd probably seen this coming from a mile away. You ready? He asked as I rolled down my window. Yeah, I said, and for the first time in months, I actually meant it. Let's go home. The real home. Because that was the other thing Blair didn't know yet. While she'd been busy planning this evening's entertainment and coordinating with her boy toy, I'd been making plans of my own. Real plans. Exit strategies. The kind of preparations you make when you finally accept that some things can't be fixed, only escaped from. I followed Jonah's taillights through the city streets, leaving behind the restaurant, the party, and 20 years of a marriage that had died so slowly I hadn't even noticed when it stopped breathing. You know that feeling when you finally take off shoes that have been pinching your feet all day? That relief when the pressure stops and you can actually breathe again? That's what the first week after the birthday party felt like, except instead of tight shoes, it was a 20-year marriage that had been slowly suffocating me without me even realizing it. Funny how you can get used to pain when it creeps up on you gradually enough. The new place was a 2-bedroom condo in a complex that didn't try too hard to impress anyone. No fancy fountain in the lobby, no doorman in a ridiculous uniform, just clean lines and honest materials that didn't pretend to be something they weren't. It was about half the size of the house Blair and I had shared, but somehow it felt bigger. Probably because I could actually breathe in it without wondering what fresh hell was waiting around the next corner. I'd been planning this move for 3 months, ever since I'd started noticing the pattern of late nights and mysterious phone calls that Blair thought she was hiding so well. While she was busy coordinating her affair and planning my public humiliation, I'd been quietly meeting with divorce lawyers, financial advisors, and real estate agents. Turns out, when you're married to someone who thinks planning means picking out color-coordinated napkins, actually preparing for the future gives you a pretty significant advantage. The best part? The house we'd shared was in my name. Just mine. A little detail from our early marriage when Blair's credit was garbage from her post-college shopping sprees, and I was the only one who could qualify for the mortgage. She'd never bothered to get her name added to the deed, probably because paperwork bored her and she assumed we'd be together forever. Funny how assumptions can bite you in the ass. I sold that house 3 days after the birthday party. Not out of spite. Okay, maybe a little out of spite, but mostly because it was time to cash out and move on. The housing market was hot, and I got enough to pay off the mortgage, cover the divorce lawyer fees, and still have a decent chunk left over for my new start. Blair could keep her designer furniture and her walk-in closet full of clothes that cost more than most people's car payments. I'd take the freedom. My phone had been blowing up nonstop since that night. Blair, of course, cycling through the greatest hits of manipulation. Anger, tears, bargaining, threats, and back to tears again. She'd left 17 voicemails in the first 2 days, ranging from furious rants about my cruel betrayal of her privacy to sobbing apologies about how she'd made a mistake and we could work through this together. Delete, delete, delete. I'd heard all her songs before, and I wasn't buying tickets to this comeback tour. But it wasn't just Blair. Monica had called 6 times, trying to play peacemaker like this was some misunderstanding that could be solved with a family dinner and uncomfortable small talk. The book club ladies had apparently designated Sarah as their representative, and she'd sent a series of increasingly desperate texts asking if I was okay, and if there was anything they could do. Even Derek had reached out, though his message was just, "Dude, what the fuck?" which honestly was the most appropriate response anyone had given me so far. The only calls I answered were from Jonah, my brother Kellen, and my lawyer. Everyone else could leave a message or figure out how to move on without my participation in their drama. Because that's what it was, drama. Blair had spent so many years turning every minor disagreement into a 3-act play that she'd forgotten some of us preferred reality to performance art. Kellen drove down from Sacramento the weekend after everything went down, bringing beer and Chinese takeout and absolutely zero judgment about my decision to blow up my marriage at a dinner party. "About time," was all he said when I finished telling him the whole story. "I was wondering when you were going to stop being a doormat. Thanks, little brother. Really appreciate the support." But he wasn't wrong. We spent the weekend setting up the new place, hanging pictures, arguing about where the couch should go, and generally pretending that assembling IKEA furniture was a normal brotherly bonding activity instead of therapy for my shattered life. Kellen had always been the practical one in the family, the guy who figured out how to fix things instead of just complaining about them being broken. Having him there reminded me that there were people in my life who actually gave a damn about my happiness instead of just using me as a supporting character in their own personal soap opera. The quiet was the strangest part. After 20 years of living with Blair, her constant chatter, her need to fill every silence with commentary about the neighbors or her coworkers or whatever drama was currently consuming her attention, the silence in my new place felt almost foreign. But it was good silence. Peaceful silence. The kind of quiet that lets you actually think your own thoughts without someone else's agenda crowding them out. I started hiking again, something I'd given up years ago because Blair thought it was boring and sweaty, and she didn't understand why anyone would voluntarily walk uphill when elevators existed. Every weekend, I'd drive up to the trails in the foothills, sometimes alone, sometimes with Kellen when he was in town. There's something about putting one foot in front of the other, focusing on nothing but the path ahead and the rhythm of your breathing. That puts things in perspective. And then there was Amira, my goddaughter. Kellen's kid, 8 years old and absolutely fearless in the way that only children can be. She didn't know the details of why Uncle Jake suddenly had a new apartment and why Aunt Blair wasn't around anymore, and she didn't need to. She just knew that weekend hikes were back on the schedule, and that was enough for her. "Why do you look happier now?" she asked one Saturday as we were sitting on a rock outcrop, sharing a granola bar and watching hawks circle overhead. Kids have this way of cutting straight through bullshit to get to the truth. "Because I remember who I am again," I told her, and realized as I said it that it was completely true. Nothing travels faster than gossip in a mid-sized city, especially when that gossip involves STDs, public humiliation, and a birthday party that went viral for all the wrong reasons. Within 48 hours of my little dinner theater performance, half the town knew that Blair McKenzie had announced her open marriage at her husband's birthday party, and the other half knew about the chlamydia plot twist. Social media is a beautiful thing when it's working in your favor and an absolute nightmare when it's not. Guess which side Blair landed on? Monica, bless her social media-addicted heart, had posted the whole thing to her Instagram stories before her brain caught up with her fingers. She deleted it within minutes, but the internet is forever, and screenshots live longer than cockroaches. By Wednesday, Blair's grand announcement had been shared, reshared, and memed into oblivion. Someone had even set it to music, Apparently, my wife's declaration that I couldn't satisfy her financially or sexually made for excellent TikTok content when paired with the right comedy soundtrack. The fallout was swift and merciless. Blair's carefully curated public image, the successful PR executive, the devoted wife, the woman who had her shit together, crumbled faster than a house of cards in a tornado. Her professional reputation, built on managing other people's scandals, couldn't survive her own public meltdown. Irony really is a bitch with a sense of humor. The Riverside Children's Foundation, where Blair had served on the board for 3 years and loved to brag about her philanthropic leadership, held an emergency meeting. They didn't even have the courtesy to fire her to her face, just a polite email thanking her for her service and suggesting that her personal circumstances made it best for everyone if she stepped down. Translation: they didn't want a walking STD scandal representing their family-friendly charity. Can't say I blame them. Her glam squad friends, the ones who'd been clapping and recording during her announcement like they were at a live taping of The View, suddenly became very busy with other commitments. Lunch dates got canceled, group text messages went unanswered, and invitations to wine nights mysteriously stopped arriving. Amazing how quickly people distance themselves when the drama gets too real and too messy for their carefully filtered social media lives. Nico, meanwhile, had pulled his signature move from college, the old disappearing act. Apparently, when faced with public humiliation and a sexually transmitted infection, his solution was to ghost harder than a Victorian mansion. His real estate office claimed he was taking some personal time, which was corporate speak for hiding until this whole thing blows over and people forget about his diseased dick. Some things never change. While Blair's world was imploding in spectacular fashion, I was discovering the unexpected advantages of being the wronged party in a very public divorce. Turns out, when your wife announces to a room full of people that you can't satisfy her, and then you prove she's been cheating with medical documentation, people tend to take your side. Who knew? My phone was ringing off the hook, but these weren't the desperate, manipulative calls from Blair anymore. These were job offers. Apparently, the way I'd handled myself at the birthday party, calm, prepared, devastating but not cruel, had impressed some people in the business community. Word gets around in professional circles, especially when it involves someone maintaining their composure under extreme circumstances. A small financial consulting firm called Meridian Analytics reached out first. They'd heard about my situation through their HR director, who'd been at the party as someone's plus one and witnessed the whole shitshow firsthand. They needed someone with my background to help them expand their client base, and they liked the fact that I'd shown grace under pressure. It wasn't the biggest company or the highest salary, but it was honest work with good people who appreciated competence over drama. The work was different from what I'd been doing at my old job, more hands-on consulting with small businesses, helping them navigate financial challenges and plan for growth. It reminded me why I'd gotten into finance in the first place, back before I'd gotten caught up in the corporate ladder climbing and keeping up with Blair's expectations game. There's something satisfying about helping a family restaurant figure out their cash flow or showing a startup how to structure their funding that makes you remember why you chose your career in the first place. My new colleagues were refreshingly normal. No office politics, no backstabbing, no one trying to one-up each other with stories about their weekend activities or their expensive purchases. Just people doing good work and going home to their families without creating unnecessary drama. Revolutionary concept, apparently. One evening, about 6 weeks after the birthday party, I was working late when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a second, I thought it might be Blair trying a new approach, but it was actually from Sarah from the book club. "Can we talk?" The message read. Blair asked me to reach out. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then typed back, "No." Simple, clear, final. I'd said everything I needed to say at the birthday party, and I wasn't interested in round 2 of Blair's greatest hits. There was nothing left to discuss, nothing to negotiate, nothing to work out. She'd made her choices, I'd made mine, and now we were both living with the consequences. The divorce papers had been filed, the assets were being divided according to the prenup Blair had insisted on when we got married. Another irony. She'd wanted to protect her assets from me, never imagining she'd be the one losing everything, and my lawyer was handling all the legal details. Clean, efficient, final. I deleted the text without responding further and went back to work. Outside my office window, The city lights twinkled like stars, and for the first time in months, the future looked bright. Different than I'd planned, sure, but bright nonetheless. Some stories don't need epilogues. Sometimes the best response is silence and the sound of your own life moving forward without looking back. Here's the thing about rock bottom that nobody tells you. It's actually a pretty solid foundation to build on. Not that I was trying to be inspirational or anything, but when you've had your entire life blown up in public and somehow managed to land on your feet, you start to realize that maybe you're tougher than you thought. Or maybe you were just so beaten down before that anything feels like an improvement. Either way, I wasn't complaining. 3 months post-birthday party apocalypse, and I was finally starting to understand what people meant when they talked about finding yourself. I'd always thought that was some new age bullshit that people said when they wanted to justify buying expensive yoga mats and going on spiritual retreats to Bali. Turns out, sometimes finding yourself just means remembering who you were before someone else convinced you that wasn't good enough. The therapy thing had been Kellen's idea, which surprised the hell out of me because my brother's usual approach to emotional problems involved beer and pretending they didn't exist until they went away. But he'd cornered me one Saturday after our hike with Amira, while she was busy trying to teach a chipmunk to take peanuts from her hand. "You know you're not actually okay, right?" he'd said, in that direct way that only family members can get away with. "I mean, you're doing better, sure, but you're walking around like someone who's been in a car accident and is just happy to be alive. That's not the same thing as being healthy." Dr. Patricia Hernandez was nothing like what I'd expected from a therapist. No couch, no notebook, no asking me how my childhood made me feel about doorknobs or whatever. Just a straight-talking woman in her 50s who'd apparently seen enough human wreckage to cut through bullshit like a chainsaw through balsa wood. "Your wife publicly humiliated you, then tried to manipulate you into accepting an open marriage that was really just permission to continue her affair," she said during our second session, like she was reading items off a grocery list. "And your response was to systematically destroy her credibility with medical evidence you'd legally obtained. How does that make you feel?" "Satisfied," I answered honestly. "Good," she said, making a note. "Because anyone who tells you that revenge can't be therapeutic has obviously never been married to a narcissist." Dr. Hernandez specialized in what she called recovery from emotional abuse, which was a phrase I'd never applied to my marriage, but was starting to make uncomfortable sense. She had me read articles and books about gaslighting, manipulation tactics, and something called narcissistic supply that described Blair's behavior so accurately it was like reading my own diary. "Emotional abusers don't usually start with the big stuff," she explained. "They chip away at your confidence gradually, making you question your own perceptions, your own worth, your own reality. By the time you realize what's happening, you've been so conditioned to doubt yourself that you don't trust your own judgment anymore." That hit way too close to home. I'd spent years wondering if I was overreacting to Blair's constant criticism, her way of making me feel like I was never quite enough, not successful enough, not attentive enough, not interesting enough. She'd had this talent for making her complaints sound reasonable, even loving. "I just want you to reach your potential," or "I'm only saying this because I care about you." The support group was Dr. Hernandez's other suggestion, and honestly, I'd rather have stuck needles in my eyes than sit in a circle with a bunch of strangers and share my feelings like we were at emotional summer camp. But she'd worn me down with logic. Apparently, talking to other people who'd been through similar experiences would help me realize that my situation wasn't unique or particularly shameful. The Riverside Men's Recovery Group met every Thursday night in the basement of a community center that smelled like burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. 12 guys of various ages, all of whom had horror stories that made my birthday party disaster look like a minor disagreement. There was Marcus, whose ex-wife had convinced him he was bipolar and needed medication, then used his mental health issues to get full custody of their kids. David, whose partner had systematically isolated him from friends and family over 5 years before cleaning out their joint accounts and disappearing. Tom, who'd been married to a woman who threw dishes at his head but convinced everyone else that he was the abusive one. "The hardest part," said Frank, a guy in his 60s who'd been coming to the group for 2 years, "is accepting that someone you loved was capable of treating you that way. We keep making excuses for them because the alternative, that they knew exactly what they were doing and just didn't care, is too painful to accept. Frank had been married for 35 years to a woman who'd convinced him he was worthless, stupid, and lucky that anyone would put up with him. When she finally left him for her personal trainer, he'd actually felt grateful, until he started therapy and realized that a normal person doesn't feel grateful when their spouse abandons them. I spent 3 decades walking on eggshells, he told us. 3 decades apologizing for things that weren't my fault, trying to be perfect enough to avoid her criticism, believing that if I just tried harder, she'd finally be happy with me. Took me 2 years of therapy to understand that she was never going to be happy with me, because my unhappiness was the point. These Thursday night sessions became my anchor, my reality check, my reminder that I wasn't crazy for feeling angry or hurt or confused, that it was normal to grieve the end of a relationship even when that relationship was toxic, that healing wasn't linear, and some days you'd feel strong, and some days you'd feel like you'd been hit by a truck, and both were okay. Slowly, I started remembering things about myself that I'd forgotten. That I actually enjoyed cooking, something Blair had convinced me I was terrible at by criticizing every meal I'd ever made. That I was funny, in a dry, sarcastic way that my coworkers at Meridian Analytics seemed to appreciate. That I was good at my job, not because someone else told me so, but because I could see the results of my work and my clients' success. I started sleeping through the night without waking up anxious about what mood Blair would be in the next morning. Started making plans for weekends that didn't involve checking with someone else first. Started saying no to things I didn't want to do without feeling guilty about disappointing anyone. For the first time in years, I looked in the mirror and saw someone I actually respected. Not perfect, not without flaws, but fundamentally decent. Someone who deserved better than what he'd been accepting. Someone who was finally enough. 6 months. That's how long it took for my life to go from a carefully orchestrated nightmare to something that actually resembled peace. 6 months since the birthday party heard round the city, and I was sitting in my kitchen on what would have been our 21st wedding anniversary, drinking coffee that I'd actually enjoyed making instead of coffee that someone else had criticized me for brewing wrong. The manila envelope sitting on my counter looked innocent enough, just another piece of mail mixed in with utility bills and grocery store circulars. But I recognized the law firm's letterhead, and I knew this was the final piece of paperwork that would officially close the book on the Blair McKenzie chapter of my life. Her lawyer's settlement offer, delivered with the kind of legal precision that screamed, "Please make this go away quietly." I opened it while my coffee was still hot, because there's something to be said for dealing with life's business while you're properly caffeinated. The terms were exactly what my lawyer had predicted. Blair would walk away with her personal belongings, her car, and a small settlement from our joint accounts. In exchange, she wouldn't contest the divorce, wouldn't pursue alimony, and most importantly, wouldn't press any charges for what her legal team was calling unauthorized access to private medical information. The irony wasn't lost on me. She wanted to buy my silence about the very information she'd forced me to have legal access to when she'd insisted on those comprehensive health screenings 6 months ago. Classic Blair, creating the trap she'd eventually fall into, then trying to pay her way out of the consequences. I signed the papers without hesitation. Not because I was afraid of her threats or tired of fighting, but because I was genuinely done. Finished. Ready to close this chapter and move on to whatever came next. The money didn't matter. I'd already reclaimed everything that was actually valuable. My self-respect, my peace of mind, my ability to sleep through the night without wondering what fresh hell tomorrow would bring. My phone rang as I was sealing the envelope to send back to the lawyers. Kellen's name on the caller ID, probably checking in like he'd been doing every few days since the birthday party explosion. My brother had appointed himself my unofficial wellness monitor, which was hilarious considering he'd spent most of his 20s living on beer and gas station burritos. "How's the anniversary going?" he asked, because Kellen had exactly zero filter when it came to uncomfortable topics. "Peaceful," I said, and meant it. "Just signed the final settlement papers. It's officially over." "Good. You free for dinner tonight?" Amira's been asking when Uncle Jake is coming over again, and Sarah's making her famous lasagna. Sarah was Kellen's wife, a kindergarten teacher who somehow managed to be genuinely nice without being fake about it. Their marriage was one of those rare partnerships that actually looked like what the wedding vows described. Two people who genuinely liked each other and chose to build something together instead of using each other as emotional punching bags. Actually, I said, looking around my quiet kitchen and realizing something. I'm hosting dinner tonight. Just a small group. You guys should come. It was a spontaneous decision, but it felt right. I'd been so focused on rebuilding my individual life that I'd forgotten about rebuilding my social life, creating new traditions, new memories that weren't tainted by Blair's particular brand of chaos. Time to start practicing what normal looked like. The guest list was carefully curated. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I only wanted people who actually gave a damn about my happiness. Kellen, Sarah, and Amira, obviously. Jonah and his girlfriend Lisa, who'd been nothing but supportive through the whole ordeal. Marcus from the therapy group, who'd become a genuine friend over the past few months. Dr. Hernandez had been invited but couldn't make it. Something about maintaining professional boundaries, though she'd seemed genuinely pleased that I was taking steps to build a social support network. I spent the afternoon cooking, actually cooking, not just heating up whatever was easiest. Grilled salmon with herbs from the little garden I'd started on my balcony, roasted vegetables that I'd seasoned the way I liked them, not the way someone else thought they should taste. A chocolate cake from the bakery down the street, because life's too short for bad dessert, and I'd learned to outsource the things I wasn't good at instead of apologizing for them. The evening was everything the birthday party hadn't been: genuine, relaxed, filled with actual laughter instead of performative social media moments. Amira regaled us with stories from 3rd grade, including a detailed explanation of why her teacher was wrong about the proper way to color inside the lines. Sometimes the best parts happen outside the lines, Uncle Jake, she said with the kind of 8-year-old wisdom that cuts straight to the truth. Marcus brought his guitar and played some acoustic songs that didn't suck, which was a refreshing change from the curated playlist hell of my previous life. Jonah and Lisa told stories about their recent trip to Portland, complete with photos of food trucks and breweries that looked actually fun instead of Instagram optimized. Kellen and Sarah just sat there looking comfortable in their own skin, the way couples do when they're not constantly performing their relationship for an audience. No dramatic announcements. No hidden agendas. No one trying to use the evening as a platform for their personal drama. Just good food, good company, and the kind of conversation that happens when people actually like each other and aren't afraid to show it. As I looked around the table while we were finishing dessert, I realized something important. This was what victory looked like. Not the explosive satisfaction of watching your enemy's world crumble, though that had definitely had its moments. Real victory was quieter than that. It was the ability to sit in your own space with people you cared about, without walking on eggshells or managing someone else's emotions or wondering when the other shoe was going to drop. The most powerful revenge, I'd learned, wasn't destroying your opponent. It was building something better than what you'd lost, something authentic and sustainable and genuinely yours. It was the peace that comes from finally being done with other people's bullshit and choosing to surround yourself with humans who enhance your life instead of draining it. The best birthday gift I'd ever received was the truth. But the best anniversary gift I could give myself was this: a quiet evening with real friends, in a space that was entirely mine, celebrating not what I'd lost, but what I'd found me.